Welcome to Reach, your platform to connect with other executive assistants and acquire game-changing knowledge and perspective. Reach is designed to inspire your workday, guide you through pivotal moments in your career, and transform you into the executive assistant you've always wanted to be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reach. I'm your host, Jessica Van, founder and CEO of Maven Recruiting Group. And today I have Janet Kim in the studio with us. Hi, Janet.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here with us. I'm really excited and looking forward to this conversation. In anticipation of our conversation today, I listened to some of your TikToks and read through several of your blogs. And I'm going to go ahead and say that you're like the Carrie Bradshaw of the executive assistant world. Your stories read like Sex and the City, and they're so fun and charismatic and engaging and super relatable and self-deprecating, and I love it. So we'll link to all of your social in this episode, but for those that are looking for a really fun but also insightful spin on the EA career, I think you're providing and producing some really awesome content. So
thank you so much. That's a huge compliment.
Yeah, right? Who doesn't want to be Carrie Bradshaw?
I know.
So apart from being the Carrie Bradshaw of the EA world, Janet is also the assistant to the CEO of Clubhouse. Mm-hmm. And today she'll be speaking with us about her transition from hospitality into the executive assistant career. So for those who are wondering if, your years of waiting tables and doing concierge work and running the hostess desk and all of these things could be a secret weapon in your career arsenal, I think the answer that we're going to hear from you today is a resounding yes. We're going to be exploring how hospitality skills that you honed through your work in time in that industry really related and translated to your ultimate immersion into the EA world. So as I mentioned, you're currently the assistant to the CEO of Clubhouse. And we're going to learn things like how you've been able to translate things like anticipation, service, client service skills, multitasking skills, problem solving, things like this into your EA career. Just in terms of a little bit of context for our listeners, in 2005, Janet managed the Nihon Whiskey Lounge, which for those of us who are from the Bay Area was quite the big deal in its era. And it was at the time the hottest whiskey bar in San Francisco. In retrospect, you've mentioned it was one of your favorite jobs as well. And it was here that you learned about how to really apply yourself, work hard, build relationships, provide customer service. And it was also actually, I think, at Nihon that you met the person that would ultimately help you transition into your first EA career or EA role, which was at Dropbox. So we'd love to hear more about that. So to start us off, maybe you can tell us a bit more about your background and particularly what you did in the hospitality realm prior to becoming the EA that you are today.
Yeah, so way before Nihon, I actually grew up in the restaurant industry. My first job, although unpaid, was working at my mom's restaurant. I filled ketchup bottles, peeled potatoes, washed dishes, all those kinds of things at 14 years old. I worked at a boba shop and a cheesecake factory once I was in college. And then after college, I decided to go to culinary school because I thought I was going to open up my own restaurant or like a slew of restaurants. And after culinary school, I got a job hosting and managing a restaurant. And then that helped me get a role at Nihon Whiskey Lounge when they first opened. During this time, while I was in school, I also worked at the Westin and the W hotels. So my whole background was hospitality. This was going to be my future. And this was how I was going to live and die. But here I am now as an executive assistant in a role that I kind of accidentally fell into because I thought this job was easy And turns out it's not easy and requires a ton of nuance and a lot of soft skills. But I love being an EA now. So, yeah.
That's great. Those are some very obviously name brand establishments. I mean, certainly renowned for the training and just the expectation that you're expected to function at if you're a part of those types of organizations and brands. So that's really helpful context. You just mentioned that you thought this would be an easy career. So what aspects of the executive assistant role and career did you identify as likely being a fit for you and your skills and your interests at the time that you made that transition?
Yeah. So again, I didn't intend to become an EA, so I wasn't particularly looking for a role where my specific hospitality skills could be a fit. I was just looking for potential office work opportunities. And I thought a lot of the work as an assistant is you're just taking things off somebody's plate and figuring things out as you go, and you just do as you're told. Like, how hard could that be? And I figured I could probably do this role because I have a natural tendency to care for people and want to help them. So that's how I ended up looking for an administrative assistant role, or like slash office manager role. But then once in the role, I realized that so much of what I learned in hospitality and working in restaurants and hotels and dealing with customers made so much sense as an EA and translated so well to the roles and the responsibilities.
Yeah. Can you share more about what some of those epiphany moments were for you? I think, what's oftentimes what thwarts a lot of people from making those career transitions is they don't quite know how to translate and how to relate those experiences. And I think that you speak these two languages beautifully, right? Because you've existed in both worlds, and you can be this functional translator to explain, what one world looked like and what your new world looks like and how those things apply. But I will say, before you answer that question, it's not uncommon that we might hear from clients saying things like, we're looking for people that are coming from a strong hospitality background. We're looking for people that have, can you source from the Rosewood Hotel or whatever it might be? Because there's this assumption that those people come with a certain kind of sophistication, a certain kind of mentality around how they relate to others. So it doesn't always translate perfectly, but there can be a good foundation there. So maybe you can share some of those skills that you saw as relevant.
So yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is obviously customer service. When you're in a customer service role, whether it's in a hotel or a restaurant, a coffee shop, or any store in the mall that you might have worked at, you will be successful in the role and happy in the role if you genuinely care about wanting to help people. Because if you have that basic foundation of caring for others, you're naturally going to want to help them. You will naturally build the relationships, and you're naturally going to want to make people happy, because ultimately that's what customer service is. And as EAs, caring is one of the most important aspects of being a successful EA. Caring about making your exec's life easier, about making sure they have a seamless calendar, representing them well, caring about them as people, making sure they have what they need in order to be successful in the role. Like, just simply caring. By simply caring, your actions and the decisions that you make will change and get better over time. Another skill that I can think of that translates really well is, like you mentioned, creative and quick problem solving. If you're serving at a restaurant, for example, how do you handle angry customers? What do you do if a table won't get up and you need to seat the next group of people? What do you do if you drop a plate of food or you forget someone's order? I remember dropping a tray of filled champagne glasses. I was on the second floor on the mezzanine. My hand and the tray was over the floor, and somebody nudged me because they scooted their chair out, and I lost balance, and the whole tray just fell onto the first floor. And in, I know, it was so bad. In that scenario, you don't have time to think, right? You can't be like, oh, I just dropped the tray of glasses over the second floor onto some people. What should I do in this
Like,
situation?
that was my next question. I was going to say, I'm guessing nobody was underneath the tray, but it sounds like there were people underneath the tray.
Yes, there were. And to be fair, this happened at Nihon Whiskey Lounge, and the second floor was not super high, so it wasn't like a drastic fall, but it still hit some people. The glasses shattered, and I had to do a lot of quick thinking. But you can't. This is what I mean. Like, you can't think about, what should I do in this situation? You have to find a solution immediately. You have to appease your guests. You have to remedy the situation, right? Like, there's no time to think. You just have to do. And, there's so many issues like this in the hospitality industry that we come across regularly, where you're kind of forced to have to quickly problem solve and also creatively problem solve. I can tell you like millions of stories, but as EAs, I feel like that's a big chunk of our work, right? We make decisions, we make mistakes, we're working quickly, we have so much on our plate. But when we do make mistakes, how do you quickly solve them? What is your solution? How do you own your mistake? How do you let your executive know? How do you creatively solve the problem so that everybody is happy, et cetera, et cetera? So that's a big skill that I learned. And then one last skill that comes to mind, and I know that, there's so many, but anticipating needs and being proactive. I think this is extremely important as an EA. But as a server at a restaurant, or even the concierge, the front desk at a hotel, you learn all of this, right? You have to anticipate needs and be proactive in order to do your job well. I remember working at the Cheesecake Factory. I struggled a lot. I was new to serving. I actually should probably have not gotten that job. But I didn't realize the importance of knowing how to multitask, and I got flustered very easily. And if you compared me to someone who has been there for like 10 years, for example, they masterfully handled their tables with grace. It was like a dance for them. And while I was like frantic, you could see it in my face and my, like, how fast I walked back and forth in the restaurant trying to get the things I needed, I didn't have this gracefulness that somebody with a lot of experience had. But as I got better at the job and did it for many more years, things became easier. I learned how to read body language and energy. I knew what people were going to ask for. I knew to print out the bill in advance and have it ready so I wouldn't be asked for it and then I have to run across the restaurant, print it out, bring it back, and waste time. I learned to take things and bring things as I go, meaning if I had 5 tables, I was going to take something from or bring something to each table as I pass them, because it's all a system. It's a dance, like I mentioned earlier. Like it becomes seamless the better you get at it, but only because you've been through the ringer and now you know how to anticipate the needs of people because you've made these mistakes in the past and you've gotten flustered in the past. So it's the same with the EA role. The first month, 3 months, 6 months, even a year that you work with an executive, you're going to be in learning mode. You're going to make the mistakes, you're going to get flustered, but also you're going to watch, you're going to observe, you're going to listen, and that's how you learn. You're going to go through experiences that will help you make better decisions as you go. You're going to notice patterns and behaviors, and this allows you to anticipate needs and be proactive. So yeah, those are the 3 skills that I think translate so well: customer service, problem solving, and anticipating needs.
Yeah, I love those examples. And I had a mother who firmly believed that everyone should be a waitress at some point in their lives, period. And that's also how I started. That was how I put myself through college. There's also very good money to be made in hospitality, right? So, and the amount of things that you can glean, and I think you really illuminated those so nicely just now. There's so much relevance, and I really think too, like what you said about being able to compartmentalize, and you may have an extreme chaotic situation going on over here. you may have just dropped a tray of champagne glasses over the mezzanine and that's going on. And you're reeling from that, but you need to compose yourself, pull yourself together, because the next group that walks in 5 minutes after that incident is not privy to what happened, and they need the best version of you present, right? And they need you to be able to offer them that experience. And so much of it is being in control of your demeanor and really owning how you show up and kind of how you pollute the space or not, right? And I think as an EA, so much of what you're responsible for is really creating a vibe and an experience and a way, recognizing how your executives want to feel and be acknowledged and really supporting them in that desire versus bringing your own baggage or chaos or whatever into the room. And, like I think it was maybe in one of your blogs or something where you talk about observing your guest in the same way that you observe your executive. And, if you see that your guest just has the thing for ketchup, right, or whatever, it's like you don't wait for them to run out of ketchup. You just automatically bring them another thing of ketchup because you know that they're going to want that. And
exactly.
that's anticipating, right?
Yeah.
And there's so many parallels in executive support.
Yeah, I think you also bring up a good point about my behavior as a server and then as an executive assistant. People look at you and then they glean from your behavior how they should react. And so if you are frantic, they see it. And even when I go to restaurants now and I see a server and their body language says they're frantic and they're freaking out about something, I get nervous for them. But as an EA too, when you're supporting the CEO and you don't look like you have yourself together, then that creates an image in people's heads, right? About what's going on in the C-suite right now. Is there drama happening? Is something like Janet is looking this way? And so it causes this.
It can set off a panic. It can set off a total panic storm. Yeah. It's like when I know you have children as well, and it's like when you have these huge reactions, right? Your kid falls, you're like, oh my God. And then they're looking at you, and if you're freaking out, then they're going to freak out. Right?
Exactly. Yes. That is a perfect example.
Yes. Yeah. Now, what about on the flip side of things? So, I think that all of the things that you mentioned, creative problem solving, accountability, anticipating needs, those are great parallels. What, though, were some of the things that you felt you weren't prepared for, or some of the things that did not translate that you had to really work hard to develop?
Yeah. I'll give you 3 things that come to mind. I would say travel bookings, scheduling, actually, and then knowing how to say no was a big thing. I never really understood travel bookings. I remember having to book travel for my executives when I first started. And remember, I came from a restaurant background where we had to understand the cost of goods sold and figure out best ways to maximize our money and discounts and budget. And we had a business to run. And ultimately, that business had to be profitable, right? So when I started a corporate career, and my execs wanted to fly business class and they had to stay at 5-star luxury hotels. It blew my mind because I was like, that's such a waste of money. What are you doing? But then I started traveling internationally with kids. And I remember thinking to myself, man, how did my executive fly to Korea on Monday, go right into dinner, then have all day meetings the next day on Korean business hours, have another dinner, more meetings, and then fly back on Thursday. It was so exhausting, even for me, because of the jet lag, and I didn't have any socializing to do or meetings to attend. And I understood then that it's not about the luxury of flying business class or being stuck up and, oh, I only stay at 5-star
Right.
hotels. It really comes down to the comfort of business class and luxury hotels and doing what you need to do and spending what you have to in order to be on your A game, because these executives are going to another country not to play or to go eat. They're there to close deals and to meet with external people or customers, right? So that was really interesting for me. I had to quickly switch how I thought about travel. And then calendaring meetings was also interesting because I remember even pre-Dropbox, I had a short stint at a temp company, and I had booked a meeting 30 minutes before the board meeting. And I didn't have any experience working with board meetings at this time. And I remember the executive getting upset. And he's like, why is this external meeting here? Like, I have a board meeting. Don't you know how stressful it is? And I was like, oh my goodness, like, I didn't know. And so I learned from that mistake and never, ever in any job that I had or have set up a meeting prior to a board meeting day. So that was a good lesson to be learned. But even like context switching. So if you have a one-on-one here and a one-on-one there, and then a team meeting, and then 30 minutes later you have this, like all of that is very disruptive to the executive. And so knowing how to compartmentalize the meetings, group the meetings, have meetings in a certain on a certain day for a specific team, like every executive is going to be different, of course, but like being able to separate those so that it's uninterrupted time, they have momentum on the work that they're doing, and they are able to minimize how much they context switch was something that I learned was very, very important. And the last thing, I guess, I know, again, there's so many more, but the biggest thing was to know how to say no. For example, coming from a hospitality industry where
there is no in hospitality.
No,
Yeah.
no. And the customer is always right. You don't say no. They ask you for something, you jump over hoops to go get it, especially as a concierge at a hotel. And so knowing how to say no was huge for me, especially at Dropbox, where I just said yes to everyone and then just kind of burnt out every 4 months. If anybody asked me for help, I was there to help them because I thought that was also my job. My job was to help everyone. In order to make this company successful, I have to make everyone successful. So I have to help everyone was how I looked at it. But, you know, that burned me out and I don't recommend it. But I think to a certain degree, it is important to help people and do things for them and say yes to them because it's a great way to build relationships and get to know people, but not at the expense of your mental health and, you know, physically burning out.
Yeah. And your stamina. So, right.
Yeah.
So can you illuminate on that a little bit more? So, or expand on that? When is it appropriate to say no? When do you pull that lever?
I think that it comes down to how you say no. So you can say no all the time, and as long as people are like understand as long as people are understanding about it, then it's okay, right? If somebody asks you for something and the way you say no is rude or demeaning, then you're not building a good reputation for yourself. You're not building relationships with this person. So I think it comes down to how you say it. Do you find an alternative solution for them? Are you like, hey, I'm so sorry, I can't help you at this moment, but is this something I can do next Monday? I'm happy to help you, but I just can't do it right now. Or like, can you ask so-and-so instead because they know all about the HR system or whatever, right? And I think a lot of people, as EAs, a lot of people depend on you. They come to you because they have a question and they're like, the EA knows all. So you are by default that person that everyone comes to. And if you say yes, yes, yes to everyone, they're just like, oh, well, Janet knows, so just go ask her. Janet knows, go ask her. Like it becomes a thing. Not because they're trying to take advantage, but because they just know that Janet knows, right? And so I think at a certain point, you have to be like, oh, you know what? I don't know that answer. I will go find out for you. And you have to verbalize that versus internally saying, oh, I don't know that answer, but let me go find out for him and then come back to him with the answer. Because then they're not going to know that you had to go out of your way to go find that answer. So I think for me, it's not like, when do you say no? Although I guess you would say no if you genuinely can't, right? You just don't have the time. For me, once I had my son and I came back from maternity leave and you have to breast pump in the middle of the day, right? And you have to get home early because your son is sick, or you have to do this because of your baby. Like, things change, your priorities change, and you no longer have the time. You can't be like, oh, my baby's hungry, but you know what? I got to finish this email. No, your baby has to come first. And so I think that helped me to start saying no to people. It kind of forced me to, because I just physically could not help. And so I would say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of X and I can't do it right now. Would it be okay if you asked Sarah, for example? And so I think there comes a point where, yes, you do have to say no, but I think the most important thing is how you say no. Treat other people like human beings. Treat them with respect, and people come to you for help for a reason, and you can help them by saying, can you go ask somebody else in a nice way, right?
Right. So the customer's always right in hospitality, but is the executive always right?
Yeah, I think the customer is always right is such a contentious saying, right? Like, the guest is not always right. I know that, you know that, they know that, everybody knows that, but yet people take advantage of it. Even, I'm guilty of not being right, but wanting to be in the right. But from the customer service side, it's not really about them being right and you being wrong, and you just have to deal with it and you take it personally. I think what it really means is that you need to treat your guests as if they are right, even when they're not, and figure out unique solutions to make them feel like their needs are taken care of and they leave content. I think some people may disagree, but for me, it's like, okay, fine. I know that you're wrong, but I'm not going to blame you, and I'm not going to make you look stupid, because that's a lose-lose situation for both of us. So I will help you, but I'll find the solution that you're looking for in a way that also helps me and that will help you leave happy. And so in the same sense, your executive is not always right. I used to actually think executives were always right, but they are not. Because executives have so much experience, right? So you're like,
Right.
wow, you have so much experience. You must be right. And that's not always the case. And so your executive is not always right. And if it's clear to you that they are not, there's no point in you telling them that they're incorrect. Like, you're wasting your mental and emotional energy. Of course, if they're like blatantly in the wrong, yes, you should say something. But if it's something little, I think it's your job to acknowledge what they've said, know in your heart that you are right, but find a solution, learn from whatever just happened, execute, and move on. I can think of actually so many examples of this, but I'll share one story. I remember my executive, he blamed me as if it was my fault. And it was very clear it was not. Like, I had written evidence in emails, like on an email thread, of him making a particular decision to meet with an external client in Oakland, in the East Bay. And it was very clear, like, no reading between the lines. It was like, sure, I'll meet you in Oakland. And so I scheduled the meeting. I set it up for an Oakland coffee shop, which was a chain coffee shop. So there were multiple of them all around the Bay Area. And the day comes, the exec shows up at the chain coffee shop, but the one in San Francisco near our office. And he calls me, he's upset. You chose the wrong location, Janet. Now I have to reschedule this meeting and yada, yada. Would it have benefited me to take a screenshot of his email and say, excuse me, you're the one who said you wanted to meet in Oakland. It's not my fault, it's yours. Probably not. I mean, like, maybe to show him that he's wrong, but also probably not, right? It wasn't the right time to send that to him. And it's not the right method. What am I trying to do? Like, am I trying to prove you wrong? That's not the point here, right? So it was something that I eventually brought up to him later when a similar situation was going to happen. And I kind of brought it in a joking fashion, like, remember that time when? But also, I'm glad that this happened because I learned from that Oakland mistake. And in the future, whenever situations like this happened, I made sure I put like a travel buffer in the calendar that said, driving to Oakland, and then in the calendar invite in brackets, you write Oakland as like the location so that there's absolutely no room for error. And that way we can also talk about it and I can remind him, right? So this is one of the things I love about making mistakes. I don't like making mistakes, but one of the things I love about when I do make mistakes is that you learn from it, you get better, and you know how to apply it to future situations. So is the guest always right? Is the executive always right? No, absolutely not. But do I always need to prove that I'm right when I'm right? Also, no, right? Sometimes it's just not worth the energy.
And how do you ameliorate the situation? Like that's, I think at the end of the day, how do we just take the edge off of the moment, right? Regardless of who's right or who's wrong, in those instances, it's how can I calm this situation down? And being right in that moment is not necessarily going to calm the situation. It could potentially inflame it.
Right.
And that's not the goal, right? I mean, that could be a career ending type of a choice, right? It's like when you're most heated, let me antagonize you.
Exactly.
Yeah. But that's, again, it goes back to like reading your audience, reading your room, having those EQ skills,
Yes.
knowing when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate. And that's, to me, that's the subtle kind of undercurrent. That's the language of EA work that's so hard to distill. But it's like either you have that nuance and subtlety in terms of how you function and navigate, or you don't, right? But I think that's kind of the X factor for me.
Yeah. And I think also not taking it personally. I know that that's a lot easier said than done. And if anybody used to take things personally, it was me. And I was like, I'm going to get fired because I did this. And I would, he's mad at me and I suck and, all of that stuff. And I realized like, executives are human also at the end of the day. And he could have had a bad day. And I happen to just be there for the person that he's taking it out on. It's unfair, yes, but also like, it's not me. It's them, right?
Yeah.
And this is a situation that can be resolved. He is upset about it at the moment. I will accept it and acknowledge. We'll talk about it another time, and I will bring it up in another way later when things have calmed down, or I may never bring it up. But I see this as a growth opportunity for me to change the way I put things on his calendar and how I work with, his emails and make sure to double, triple check everything. And so I think, not taking things personally will help you kind of calm down a little bit and be like, okay, move on. Like, I'm so busy anyway. I have all these other things to do. I cannot dwell on this piece. Even though here 8 years later, I'm still dwelling and bringing it up as an example.
You hold yourself to a high standard. That's not a bad thing. But yeah. So I'm curious about, you mentioned these things that you had to work on, saying no, the calendar, the travel. How did you get up to speed on the businesses themselves, right? Because there's a certain language and business acumen and kind of knowing what the different organizational heads do, what they're responsible for. You've worked in these, very product-centric companies. Like, how did you actually absorb all of that? Or did you already kind of have a good understanding of those things?
No, I definitely did not. Tech was new to me. At Dropbox, I used it, but I didn't realize that it required so much on the back end. And to me, I'm not a strategy and business type of person. Like, I'm good at being an executive assistant and helping my executive and their team. Um, but I think by doing the role and watching and observing and listening in meetings and reading through emails and seeing what kinds of documents come through, I was also in charge of the agenda for the staff meeting that we had. So reading through those, I just kind of naturally picked it up. And not everything, of course, but like the high level things, the corporate speak, the acronyms, all of those. And I understood the priorities of the company just by default from reading and listening and just kind of studying on my own. But I was telling this story to someone the other day. I actually, when I quit Dropbox in 2018, my friend he was making fun of me because he was explaining to me to drag and drop a file into the desktop client. And I was like, what do you mean the desktop client? And he was like, stop. Like, you don't know the drop. What do you mean? And what do you mean? And I was like, oh, I use Dropbox on the web. And he's like, Janet, are you kidding me right now? He's like, we just went through a whole marketing event and a huge thing about this. And you're telling me you don't use the Dropbox desktop client. And so to this day, I still don't use it. And so I was telling another EA, like, you don't have to know everything about the product, and clearly you don't have to use every aspect of the product either to be good at being an EA. But I think by default, naturally, you should want to understand the high level things that are going on and the high priority items or people. And I think working in the C-suite, you're also privy to a lot of information that the rest of the company is not. And so you learn how to read the things that are happening around you and, which documents are important, and you understand like the behind the scenes of the company, not so much the what's happening on the eng team and what does this VP of product do and, things of that sort. So to me, I think it's like half and half. Like you do need to know a little bit about the business, but also like don't feel like as an EA you have to know everything about the business and be in all of the strategy meetings in order to be a great EA. You can be a great EA without having to do all of that.
Yeah. That I think that's hopefully encouraging to a lot of people. But I also hear you saying something very key too, which is that you were always applying this sort of observation hat and being very attuned to what was going on around you. You might not need to be a subject matter expert, but you were very attuned and observant of who was trading conversations with who, what about, who's important to these conversations, whose role is. I mean, you were definitely taking stock and getting a lay of the land, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing is, picking up on what you need to pick up on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So for those who are wanting to get up to speed, I mean, were there certain resources that you utilized to hasten your learning curve? I mean, nowadays we have people like you, right? We have all of your social content. So for people that want to hear firsthand about your trials and tribulations and what you've learned and what you've come to understand is so important, whether it's how to choose the right restaurant, right? Which you talk a lot about, for a business meeting. So there's, your social is that executive assistant life. And I think you have Twitter by that, you have your Medium blogs by that, and also TikTok, correct?
Yeah, TikTok, Instagram, and Substack.
And Instagram, thank you. Yes, not Medium, it was Substack. So there's that for those who are looking to get up to speed. Are there other resources that you would direct people to as far as, things that can help them get a sense of things?
Yeah, I think that you don't always have to go to EAs actually to get your resources. Sometimes talking to the people in your own company is actually super helpful. Not just about learning about the business, but like getting to know them and what they do just on a surface level, right? I'm not saying like go become best friends with everybody in your company, but like building relationships with everyone is helpful to you as an EA because it helps you get different perspectives. Like you're not just getting an EA's perspective, but you get different people's perspective and thoughts and advice. And you see different relationships around the company, and you see what makes certain people happy and certain people not. For example, I remember at Clubhouse, there was this designer who had a particular stance on how the hand, so Clubhouse logo is a hand waving, and so she had a particular stance on how the hand was drawn and the outline of it. And it was, I would have never known that had I not built a relationship with her and talked to her about it. And it's not a big deal, but when everybody in the company feels a certain way and there's like a handful of others who agree with this person, like you notice, oh, there's tension, and this was a design element that somebody like me is not privy to, and I have no idea. It kind of looks the same. It's like Anne Hathaway in Devil Wears Prada when she like scoffed at, I think it was the belt or the scarf or something, and she's like, oh, it all looks the same. But those kinds of things make a difference. Anyway, so I think as far as resources, building relationships with other EAs is helpful. I try to be helpful in my own social media, of course, but talking to others in your company and getting to know them, and also just by doing, you're going to learn. Like, don't be afraid to make mistakes, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because if you're not making mistakes, you're not growing. And then if you're not asking questions, you're not learning. So I think that just simply by doing the work, you can learn so much as well. But for me at Dropbox, I was able to rely on the EA to the CEO at that time. She was the first one, I was the second one. So she really handheld me and walked me through, like, here's what Dropbox is, here are the people, everybody meet Janet, and here are the documents you need. So that was very helpful, but also doing the work, meeting other people, reading documents, being very curious and kind of like nosy, and reading through whatever the company had to offer was something that really helped me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Those are really great suggestions. Last question about your transition. So how would you recommend people market their hospitality experience in a way that will resonate with potential future employers? So whether it's in the actual resume document itself, or whether it's in how they show up for an interview, how do you recommend that they characterize that experience to be most effective?
I think that on your resume, if there's a way for you to include the word assistant or office manager in the title, or some way, if there's a way you could do that, I think that helps, because that's a keyword that sticks out to people. But in the bullets, as you're describing the role, there are so many things that you do as a server, a host, a manager of a restaurant or a cafe that translate well into the role of an EA. So making sure you mention those things. So if you're a manager at a restaurant, you managed inventory, you handled events, for example, you manage people's schedules, right? And so like being able to coordinate those and find things that are common and put those on your resume as bullet points could be helpful, because we're always looking for keywords, right? When we're looking as recruiter, you come through 100 resumes, you can't read through every single one of them. You're kind of skimming, so you're looking for keywords, and so make sure those keywords stand out. And then in your interview, I think what really impresses me in an interview, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of EA interviews, is when people mention soft skills as their strength. I think that is impressive and also unique, because so many people come to interviews with the same answers. And a lot of the time you can tell, oh, they're just memorizing lines, or they just Googled the answer and it sounds exactly like this other person I interviewed. But when somebody comes to you with like, here are the soft skills that I have, here's what I really love doing. I enjoy taking care of people. I want to help others. Like talking about those things, and here's, the experience that I have in hospitality, that kind of stuff makes me happy. That makes me be like, oh my gosh, I think this person really gets it.
They
She
get
gets
it.
the role. He gets the role. Like, yeah. And it's not just getting your executive lunch, picking up their laundry, and scheduling and booking travel, right? Like, there's so much more behind the scenes stuff that we do that is so much more important, I think, than knowing how to physically do the job. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And being a good storyteller, which I think goes along with the soft skills of, it's one thing to say, I really love helping people. It's another thing to say, I really love helping people. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that in the last role that I was at or whatever. And I think that's something that you do. I mean, that's something that you've done all throughout this conversation is you punctuate really beautifully. You punctuate all of your points with storytelling and examples and anecdotes. And I think that's what also makes your content really fun and really rich, is because it's so rich with detail and life. And again, that's why I think you're the Carrie Bradshaw, because it's like you're sharing your experiences, and sometimes they are very vulnerable and sometimes they're like awkwardly relatable, but I think like the storytelling part really shows that you're really synthesizing and you're understanding how your past relates to the present or the future that you want to go, and connecting those dots, right? And people love stories. I think that
yeah,
they'll forget that you said you were detail oriented. That's a dime a
yes,
dozen. But they'll remember
right.
that amazing story you told about how you memorized the 20 different, drinks that your table needed to have, and
Yes.
what your process was for remembering that detail.
Yeah. And I think things like that, those kinds of stories as a server or just somebody working in hospitality, you don't think to put them on your resume, right? Like you can't really as a bullet point, like, oh, I can remember 20 drinks. Like, no, that's not something you put on a resume, but you can certainly talk about it. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, that's not that important. But it's like, no, those are the skills that you need to have. One of my skills at Nihon Whiskey Lounge, I had a notebook. It was a secret notebook of mine where I would write down people's names and maybe what they look like or who they came in with, what their favorite whiskey was that they were drinking. And these people would be repeat customers. So I would be like, oh, I remember this person, what was their name? And I would flip through the book and it's like, oh, their name is Jessica. And I'd be like, Jessica, hi, so nice to see you
Yeah.
again. And like,
Yeah.
as a complimentary act, I would bring you your whiskey that you drink every time you come. And that would make you feel good as a customer and make you a repeat customer, right? Even more so. And so those kinds of things are very relatable in the EA world. I am very good at reading people and reading or memorizing people's names and things about them and being able to bring them up later on. And I have every job I've ever worked at, I have a profile on every executive who I've supported, but also their direct reports. And so I know a lot of things about a lot of people, and I'll bring it up later. Or like, for Clubhouse, actually, our CEO, we're a remote company, but I get all his Grubhub orders. So I can see what he's ordering, and he always leaves out peanut butter, and he always adds chicken and avocado, and he does this and that. And one time he was just in back-to-back meetings, and I was like, he said, can you grab me lunch? And if I had not written all of this down, I wouldn't have known what to get him. And they don't want you to be like, what do you want for lunch? It's like, no, just go get me lunch.
Right.
Like, and
Exactly.
so just being able to do those kinds of things are like skills, and they are skills that are translatable to the EA world.
100%. I love that example so much of having the diner's profile.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Final question for you, Janet. It's what we ask of all of our guests. If you could support anyone in the world, past, present, future, whatever, who would you choose to support and why?
So it's going back and forth. I would support Princess Diana. I have an infatuation with the royal family. I did a full book report for a whole semester in college on her. I studied abroad in London. I did so much research, and she's just fascinating to me, her story and who she is, who she was as a person and a princess. And so I just love her. I would support Princess Diana. But if I could also mention, I wish that I could support just moms. I wish I could just create a company of mothers
Yeah.
helpers and just help moms with little things that they need help with and not charge, $40 an hour for whatever, but like, oh, you need Amazon packages returned. Oh, you need your trash taken out. You need your laundry folded. I got you. And like just help because I think that it's really hard for mothers, especially
Mm.
working mothers and to be able to
Mm.
support, provide them with support, I think could be so helpful. Like I could use somebody like that, but I just don't have the budget to pay someone $40 an hour. But yes, I love Princess Diana, so I would support Princess Diana.
Yes, those are both such great answers. And as a mom myself who had a series of vulnerable meltdowns yesterday of just feeling like utterly overwhelmed by everything, the momness of it all and the full-time
Yeah.
careerness of it all, and just like,
Yeah.
yeah, yesterday was a rough day. I would have loved to have had that service yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Great answer. Well, again, for those who are interested in hearing more from Janet, please check out all of her resources. They're a lot of fun. In addition to being really informative, it's That Exec Assistant Life.
Thank you.
And thank you again for joining us. This was a lot of fun. Reach is brought to you by Maven Recruiting Group, who specializes in placing executive assistants and support staff to the Bay Area's most prominent executives and companies. If you've enjoyed being part of our podcast community and are interested in becoming part of our candidate community, we're currently hiring for roles in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles. You can visit us at www.mavenrec.com to see some of the roles we're currently working on and to submit your resume.